Edward, how are you?
Pretty good, Yaman. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm good. How was your weekend?
Pretty good. A little hectic. We're just trying to wrap up my son's deal on the new or used Model 3 Tesla. So we've been dealing with that since last Monday. So and they had an issue with transporting it from Miami to Tampa. So there was just kind of a hassle with it, but everything worked out pretty good.
What kind of Model 3 is it?
It's the Standard Range Plus, 2021, and had 16,000 miles on it, and we got it for 21,000. And it had the 4,000, I guess, already taken off at the dealership. So it was basically like 25, dropped to 21. To me, it's a steal. As far as mileage, it's still under all three warranties, which is really sweet in that situation for him.
Thank you. And thank you to those in YouTube live chat letting me know that the audio quality is good. I think the fixes that we made last week looks to be working fine. So that makes me happy. At the top of our screens is a screenshot of Tesla used inventory showing that Tesla is now advertising Model 3s for less than $25,000 on the used inventory page, which means you can get a used Tesla from Tesla.com and qualify for the $4,000 credit, which is amazing. Why did you go, Edward? Why did you guys go with a third-party dealer?
We were just honestly, I was looking all over the place. I was looking close to Tampa, and then we broadened the search to Florida, all of Florida, and because the shipping is only a couple $100, so it's kind of negligible. So we had it shipped from Miami for like 230 or something like that, 240. So, and he just picked it up today. He's freaking out. He freaking loves it. So, and it had a couple minor things, a couple minor scratches or whatever, and they had to do things to prepare it and everything. But as far as going through the third party, they had a great almost 5-star review rating on the dealership. So I think that's critical that you don't buy through a dealer with like 2 or 3 stars necessarily. We did our due diligence for about a week and a half.
Okay, good. Phil Flexity, how are you? What's news with you?
I'm good, Yaman. How are you?
I'm good. What's new with you? How was your weekend?
It was good. We had a festival in my country.
There's FSD in your country. What do you mean? Can you explain?
No, we had a festival in my country, so I'm with family today.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I hope you enjoyed the festival. Omar is on the speaker board. Omar, how are you?
Hey, doing good.
Good. Man, what is your mic? I'm looking to get a new mic. Maybe something portable. What is it?
I'm just using my iPhone mic.
Yeah, I can't do that right now because I'm posting the space on the iPhone, but I'm looking to get an external microphone that is portable, that kind of attaches to my collar. I'm going to test that out next. Let's see how that works. Finflexity?
You can try the Sony mic. I think it is $10 only, and I think it has good quality for a lapel mic.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to deal with that on my own. I'm just happy at this point that the audio issues in YouTube seems to have been solved. And at the top of your screens is my conversation with Omar. We had a good conversation. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 10, an hour and 20 minutes. We covered everything from robotaxis to Optimus and a little bit about Elon Musk. And also, towards the end, you can learn more about Omar himself. Took some audience questions. It was a great conversation. Omar, how'd you feel about it?
Yeah, it was fun. I recommend everyone go listen.
Good. And then if you sign up for the channel as a member, you get access to the YouTube live chat. And so that's at the top of your screens. Omar, what's new with you today?
Nothing much, just really enjoying FSD, but also disappointed it hasn't rolled out to everybody. I mean, this hands-free rollout has just been really painful when you can see the software making such huge leaps, but everybody's still running 12.3.6. So yesterday I did, hours of driving through Los Angeles, 80 plus miles. And I also signed up for Uber and I did a few real rideshare rides and I recorded that and I'll have the video out probably, later today or tomorrow. And, this thing can just do an hour of Uber driving for you. There was one takeover I had where someone asked me to pick them up in a McDonald's parking lot, and there was no other outlet into the parking lot, so I had to manually take the car and turn it around because it can't reverse yet. Other than that, there were no takeovers or interventions. I just put in every address, it did it all. Okay. So I don't think people are really getting this, that it can do Uber driving for you. If you do 4 hours a month, you get FSD for free essentially. The rides you give pay for the cost of FSD subscription. So it's kind of a no-brainer. I think every Uber driver is going to want to have one of these. And as you mentioned, anyone can actually afford FSD now because you've got obviously these used deals on Tesla.com, but you've also got these dealers. You got guys like Cheap Teslas. And a lot of these dealers, your local dealer may even have one cheaper because Tesla tends to sell
Yeah,
them a little higher
dude,
on their website.
look at these deals at the top. Like these are actual listings from today, and I posted a bunch of them. You can get a used Model 3 for $11,999. That's incredible. Gas savings alone pays for itself, and these batteries are supposed to last up to 500,000 miles. They're designed to last 300,000 to 500,000 miles, maybe more. I mean, there are incidents of Model 3s or Teslas lasting for more than 500,000 miles. Why wouldn't you buy these cars, right?
Well, I mean, these are really high mileage cars, so I'm sure they have a number of problems with them at this price range. But if that's what you can afford, then there
Well,
is probably a
so
high mileage Tesla in that range.
so the two I posted at the top have high mileage, but if you look at the one I just posted at the top, these have 20, 30, 40,000 miles, 25,000 miles for a 2023 Model 3 for $23,000, 29,000 miles for a 2023 Model 3 for $19,000. These deals are unbeatable.
Yeah, so you can really get a Tesla for anybody, have them start using FSD, your kids. They've now got those parental control features too. So if you've got a young driver, I mean, I would get them a Tesla. And the used dealers, they can give you that $4,000 point of sale credit. So if you find your local dealer and let's say they've got a Tesla for, you know, $25,000, you can walk out of there for 21,000 cash plus taxes and fees.
Edward,
Yeah, I think most of those used dealers already kind of put it into that price. I think most of them already kind of account for it from when we got my son's vehicle last week. That was already built in. It was essentially like 24 something, and then it brought it down to 21. But I wanted to mention something really quick that the biggest thing that we did prior to buying the used car was we did a true cost of ownership evaluation. Currently, he had a 1997 25-year-old Sentra, which was costing him $11 a day for the last 2.5 years. The new Tesla that he has at 21,000, if you subtract the resale of the vehicle after about 4 or 5 years, subtract all the the gas savings, the oil changes, all that, it basically comes down to about $3.50 a day. It's unbelievable difference in the cost of ownership for these used vehicles that are electric. I mean, it's mind blowing. I couldn't believe it. I had to run the numbers multiple times.
So it's $7 a day saved. You could afford to get him FSD subscription and still have $4 a day saved.
Yeah,
Daniel,
So I just wanted to say about a thing about Elon's price cuts we had last year. So the main thing that I hear about people not getting an electric car is the depreciation value. So it's like if you bought a Tesla 2 years ago, it's a lot cheaper to buy it now. So your car is depreciated a lot when gas cars hold their value because obviously there hasn't been a massive price war. And it's the same as like any other electric car vehicle. So I just wanted to say, like, have Elon's price cuts been a huge mistake? Because obviously, if a car gets cheaper, then yeah, you're more likely to buy it. But now looking at buying an electric car now, the depreciation value puts off a lot of buyers like interest just because they might buy the car and then in 2 years it's going to be worth like 60% less. So I was just wondering, like, what do people think about if Elon's price cuts were like a big disadvantage to Tesla's overall demand?
Well, I think it's it's mostly a myth that EVs are especially bad. I mean, in many cases, you had a lot of these EVs come up during the pandemic when there was a shortage of cars. Nobody could make cars. So this pushed prices very high. Even used car prices were going up, right? So it was a very unusual time. Usually you buy a car and it depreciates over time. In this case, cars were appreciating. So whether you bought a gas car or an electric car during that time, it's going to be higher than what the price ended up being a few years later. And pretty much anybody who bought a car, whether it's a gas car, an electric car, or a hydrogen car, got burned if they bought a car during this time. Now, Tesla made a lot of cars during this time. They had their production running, whereas others kind of had their production shut down. So, this is when they were really kind of ramping up the Model 3 and Y. So that might be why there's a lot of people who say, okay, maybe I'm underwater. I bought this thing so high, they cut it. But, there was no way to really avoid cutting the price, I think. When you really look at what's happening in the auto market today, where supply is returned, and in many cases, you have these legacy auto EVs with deals that are, financing deals that are even cheaper than Tesla in terms of a monthly payment. There was basically no way to avoid bringing down the price. It couldn't have been sustained at those levels forever without cutting production volumes substantially. So, if you look historically before the pandemic, Teslas have actually held their value better than any other vehicle. And people have always done pretty well. I mean, if you look at articles before, people were actually saying, well, you actually save a ton on depreciation because these are modern vehicles and, people tend to want to buy them. It was really only during this period that you saw a readjustment from pandemic levels. But I think going forward, so if you're to buy a car today, the car is getting pretty close to COGS, right? So we're not going to see another 10%, 20% price cut in Model 3 or Y. So I think somebody who buys today, certainly someone who buys a used Tesla for $25,000, they're going to have very good depreciation on that, probably industry leading depreciation.
Great. So I see Grant raising his hand. Before Grant brings negativity to the space, I want to give a shout out to our two sponsors. Joa is one. The link is at the top of your screens. TSLA Live is proudly sponsored by Joa, your go-to source for premium Tesla accessories. From innovative phone mounts to cutting-edge charging solutions, Joa offers everything you need to enhance your Tesla ownership experience. Don't miss out on the special offer for the Spaces listeners. Use coupon code TSLA Live at checkout for exclusive discounts. The link is at the top of your screens. Thank you, Joa, for supporting our Tesla community. And our second sponsor, Pay More. We finally have a paragraph to read. Check this out. Do you have old cell phones gathering dust, MacBooks or iPhones just sitting around? Turn that unused tech into cold, hard cash at Paymore. Paymore pays top dollar for your electronics. Whether it's the latest iPhone or an older model, Paymore wants it. Visit to find your nearest store. With over 100 locations in the US and more coming globally, cash is just around the corner. Don't wait. Thanks, Paymore, for supporting TSLA Live. The link to both of those are at the top of your screens. I appreciate when people support our sponsors. They make this space possible. Grant,
Yeah, two things. Was going to say, I agree with what Omar said. I think cutting production is the way that you can avoid having cars depreciate like this. And buying today is probably not a bad bet because, you know, the cost has come down enough. I think that makes sense. I wanted to ask about a news story that I posted involving a police officer hit by a Tesla on Sunday. There was an officer on the highway who was
Yeah, you have to clear with me to change topics. Thanks, Grant, for sticking to the rules of the space. You're a very respectful speaker. Omar, question for you. So I pinned at the top a summary by Grok. This summary was just published about an hour ago. Tesla FSD V12.5 significant safety improvements, and highlight the sentence at the top shows. Users report that FSD V12.5.1.3 is approximately 14 times better in terms of miles driven by disengagement and 4 times safer than its previous version, V12.3.6. Would you elaborate on this for us, please?
Yeah, I believe Grok is referring to an analysis by Rains, an ex-user, and he dug into the data a little bit, and he found that there's a 14 times reduction in interventions between 12.3 and 12.5. That matches up with what I'm seeing. I've been saying it's actually a greater than 10x improvement. And, you know, frankly, interventions doesn't tell the whole story because the comfort, the smoothness, the speed at which it executes maneuvers, those aren't really captured in the intervention data, but they're a big difference to user satisfaction. Honestly, watching people who don't have a Tesla and don't use FSD try and analyze FSD data from the community tracker is like watching a bunch of virgins try and understand sex by looking at a spreadsheet. There's a lot more to it than just, you know, looking at some number. And you know, there have been people, even Tesla bulls, making claims that FSD isn't improving. FSD hasn't gotten better since March. And you know, it's just kind of ridiculous to me. This is the biggest leap between updates I've ever seen, bigger than even 11 to 12, arguably. And I think miles per intervention is being driven down. There's no doubt about it. Miles to safety critical intervention is being driven down. But more than that, there's a lot of other things, a lot of other areas that are non-intervention areas that have improved as well.
Okay, so there was a recent post by Rains. Sometimes he visits this space. Maybe we can ask him to elaborate on this a bit more. And I pinned it at the top. I'm not very familiar with his methodology here. Would you be able to explain it to us?
Well, I think he essentially just tried to do a more like for like comparison. One of the problems with the FSD tracker is there's just tons of noise, right? So it's really difficult to be able to say conclusively that, hey, you know, this is getting better or it's not getting better. Because there's noise in the last version, there's noise in this version. For example, let's say the weather was bad on this new version. Let's say there was a rainstorm. And they, you know, they do have some information about weather, but the stats might look low compared to the older version. So that's what we call noise. It's not actually related to the performance of the software. Like people forget that every drive is unique. It could be you had an intervention just because, you know, there was a clown juggling in the middle of the road or something, and, you know, that clown isn't usually there or something. So there's a ton of noise in the data. It makes it difficult to say, draw any conclusions definitively. But I think what he did is really focus on the same drivers and say, how do their drives, someone who had both, compare from one to the other? Trying to eliminate some of the noise and really looking at just sort of a more direct comparison that controls for some of these sort of external factors. Like, for example, not everyone has 12.5. So if the people who have 12.5 are people, let's say they sent it to people in the most challenging areas to test it to those people, then the group that has 12.5 is different than the group that has 12.3. So there's noise introduced there in that you're focusing more on that data versus the general population. So, obviously these are all estimates. There's no way to know for sure what it is for the broader fleet, but it's definitely interesting seeing people who are very good at analyzing Tesla's auto business just sort of completely struggle to know how to interpret the data correctly with FSD.
Okay, so we have Omar, Reigns, and Just for Fun on the speaker board. So this should be a really good discussion about disengagements, interventions, how to analyze the data. If you have a strength and if you follow these topics closely, please request to speak, to ask questions to each other and make some insightful points. Let's have an insightful discussion about this topic that is gaining tremendous amount of views. Reigns' tweet today gained, is this from today? No, from yesterday. In the first 24 hours, no, 12 hours, 126,000 views. I believe Elon replied to another reply by Vicky, who's a regular speaker here. So there's Reigns. Did Elon like this post?
I don't think so. I don't think he likes it.
Okay.
He replied
so-
to one of the replies to the post.
Yeah, I got you. So, it's part of the reason why this post is getting more than 100,000 views. And it shows tremendous improvement. And it says V12.5.1.3 is 14 times better overall and 4 times safer than V12.3.6. That is an incredible step change. Improvement shown in Reigns' graphic. And also says this month, FSD 12.5.x already got 1.4 times better overall and 2 times safer. Reigns, so I'm a little unclear about your methodology on this. Would you please explain to us specifically how you select? How do you select and how many drivers you select whose data to analyze?
Okay, so the methodology really came from the initial doubts that I have because initially when I start to analyze those data, I just take every numbers and trust everything. But then when I started to report my own data, then I realized that it really makes a significantly impact about like whether you take over early or you take over late. And I realized that very few people actually notice that there is a tester view in the community tracker, and the tester view is like you can track which tester did how many miles and how many interventions across different versions. And then I just realized, okay, I can isolate the variables. So actually, I try to collect all the testers for each versions and try to do an intersection. However, because we all know that there are not many testers in the community contribute to the community tracker, so I'm having some trouble. I need to emphasize that I did some estimation trick. So basically, if you really want to get the intersection between all the 12.5 versions, you will only have like 3 or 5 testers, which is very, very small. So I did some estimation trick by calculating intersection between adjacent versions. And I did some assumption. For example, if let's say if 12.3 is 2 times better than V11, and then we have another same testers are reporting that 12.5 is another 2 times better than 12.3, then I assume 12.5 is approximately 4 times better than V11. This is not the perfect approach, but I would argue that this is the best I can do based on there are very, very few data out there.
Okay,
And yep.
so my question to you was, how do you select the drivers to analyze?
I didn't actually select drivers. The only thing I did is I wrote my own code. It automatically extracts all the testers from adjacent versions, and it automatically calculate their data and to draw a graph. So let's say if we have, if my code automatically found there are 10 testers between V12.3 and V12.5, and they all contributed to both versions, my code will get their data and draw a data point on the graph. So I actually didn't manually select any testers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's say on an average analysis, you're going from version to version. How many drivers do you usually look at?
So I think each version would be probably approximately about maybe 20, 30 testers contribute to like 2,000, 3,000 miles, like that. And when I do cross version analysis, the tester would be approximately around 5 to 10 and more than 2,000 miles. But I should argue that, you know, I know a lot of guys are concerning about only having a very few testers on the data. But the fact is, the fact that you will see a lot of variance in FSD data is really just because different testers. That is one of my previous analysis. So basically, it means if you really track the same testers, the data really don't vary that much, and the sample is not. So when people say that your sample size is not large enough, I would argue that the sample is not a tester, but a data entry or even a mile that is driven. And if we consider that for each cross-version analysis, we actually has more than 2,000 miles. And actually, if you really record data yourself, actually in your own location, if you just drive maybe 500 miles, you would probably already have a very solid data for your own location. So that is why when I try to do this cross-version analysis, I figure that only 5 to 10 testers contribute more than 2,000 miles, as long as I track them, the same groups of guys across different versions. The data seems really solid. So that's my point. But I mean, it's not perfect, but it's really the best I can do right now.
Okay, just for fun, what are your views on Reigns' post at the top?
Sorry, I'm just opening up to make sure I'm looking at the right one. I mean, I'd say overall, Reigns, thanks for all the work, and I've replied to some of your posts in the past, and appreciate you all the work you've shared and some of your replies to my posts. I think overall, it's definitely interesting. I think I think he's providing a lot of good analysis and perspective. I think probably the biggest challenging thing is, there are a lot of sort of different assumptions being made, that he described and that Omar was describing. But I do really like the sort of cohort approach, right, where you're trying to eliminate some of the noise by looking at the same drivers across different versions.
Okay, so are you convinced that 12.5.1.3 is 14 times better overall and 4 times safer than 12.3.6?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say definitely not convinced. I would believe, just based on sort of all the anecdotes and the data that Reigns is working on, that 12.5 overall is a material step up better than 12.3 or 12.4. There's just going to be noise, right? Because we don't have a ton of data here, so it's hard to know like the exact step up. And I guess one thing I was surprised by is that I think it's not in this post. I think there was another post that Rains had where it's showing that 12.5.1.3 is significantly better than 12.5. I was a bit surprised by that since the overall data, it doesn't seem like 12.5.1.3 is that much of an improvement. So I was curious, like how confident Rains is that that chart is correct. I think it's like the blue and
Rains.
red one.
Okay, actually,
Yeah, I
I
think
think
just for fun, I think that's the second tweet at the top. So you can see that. Rains.
Yep. So I think that's a very valid concern. And actually, that is one of the most significant issue that I realized if you just look at the community tracker data, because, I realized that for each initial version release, such as 12.3 or 12.5, these versions usually have a very high data, so like very high intervention, very good, very like perfect intervention data. But on the later dot release, the data usually drops down. And if I actually take a very deep look into this and I compare the testers between the initial data the builds and the later data builds, and I realized that they're like I would say approximately 70% to 90% of people are different. So like the intersection between the 12.5 to 12.5.1.3 is probably only 10% of people who actually contribute to the latest version. And I believe that is the core effects that cause the wrong metrics to show like maybe the latest version is not a huge improvement. I would guess that the root cause for this is that initial release are usually roll out to guys like Omar or those very OGs. So they really let the FSD do its thing. They take over very late, and sometimes even when FSD do some mistake, they just let it happen and they didn't take over. But then when Elon, when Tesla FSD team look at the data, look at the very large scale data, and they realize, okay, it's getting good enough. So they decided to roll out to the public. And when public, those they're more wife tests, more fiance tests, and in those tests, people tend to take over early, and that's why later versions usually show worse metrics. But if you really take a look at the same tester, it's really improving. So that is one of the most important thing, I think.
Okay, thank you. Grant?
Hey, I didn't have my hand up, but as the cynic, I'll ask some questions. I think it's an interesting piece of analysis. I think a lot of what you're saying makes sense and feels intuitive. The idea that people would get more comfortable with the solution as time goes on. How many miles are behind the data here? I know that it's going to be less overall, but I'm curious what the scale of that data set looks like.
I think for each adjacent version, I'm trying my best to have at least 1,000 miles, but the average will be approximately 2,000 miles between each adjacent versions.
It's like 2,000 per version.
By the way, I'm showing on YouTube Reigns' graphic. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the graphic on your screens right now, and the clear increase in miles to critical disengagements multiplier, miles to disengagements multiplier on your screens right now. Any other questions to Reigns? Omar, how do you explain the dramatic difference? Actually, Reigns, I'm going to put you on mute because we're getting some static, just for fun.
Yeah, thanks. So, Rains, this is a question on the chart that you have pinned. I'm not sure if Iman is showing this or not in one of the posts, but the one that's currently pinned on your profile, just curious, why does the blue line go down, the human miles to accidents?
Showing this now on the pin at the top as well as YouTube screen. Rain?
Okay, so that is actually because if you look at the miles to accident data disclosed by Tesla, and you will see that US average miles to accident. So the human driving data is actually becoming worse in Q2 than Q1. So I aligned them using the release dates of each FSD versions to show that sometimes human drive worse, but FSD always goes up.
Do you mind if I ask another question, Iman?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely helpful. And then for the red line on that chart, miles to accidents, is this not an estimate of miles to critical disengagement, but sort of your estimate of a mile to an actual accident? And then the chart is created by doing sort of the cohort analysis you were talking about. And so that's how you explain why this, goes up to, I guess, near 600, as opposed to what the FSD beta tracker shows, where 1.3 is much lower than 12.5. So it's just based on that, looking at that cohort by cohort analysis.
Okay, so for this post that I pinned, I would say is probably I actually value this analysis more than the cross version analysis using the relative multiplier, because I believe the most significant mistakes that the public makes is even think about or try to compare the disengagement rate to accident rate, because actually in US human will run a red light every 3,000 miles, but the accidents rate is more like 500,000 miles to each accident. So it is not even close. But whenever FSD runs a red light, like immediately we count it as a critical disengagement. So in this analysis, I tried my best to estimate what would be the estimated accident rate if we release 12.5 today as assume it is already feature complete. And I would argue that the relation between miles to accident and the miles to disengagement is really like we should just take the squared of the disengagement rate, and it automatically become the estimated accident rate. That is one of my very controversial arguments. But I really, really think very deeply in these arguments, and I believe in it.
Edward.
Yeah, I had a question for Rains. How do you account for all the disengagements, let's say in parking lots, or if you're pulling up, you got to pull into your driveway? Like I never disengage, but until I'm in a parking lot or basically in my driveway. How do those get filtered in or out?
Actually, that is a very good question, because to be honest, I never trust FSD when I, went in the parking lot, because I disengage every time if I did. And to be honest, there's no clear rule in the community tracker about whether you should engage your FSD like when it's like in your parking lots, or when you already goes to the main road. There's no clear rule. So the only thing I hope is that by doing those same caster analysis, all those people will keep their tendency, keep their behavior. So let's say if they engage their FSD in parking lot, let's say 10% of the time, and it cost like disengagement, lots of disengagement, like, and we just hope they keep doing that for each version. So that is something like limitation we have right now.
Just for fun.
Yeah, just so we have a better idea. So just on that same chart we were talking about, the one pinned on your profile, as an example. So like for the 12.5.1.3, it's close to, I guess is it 600,000 miles per accident? So what's, I guess in a simple high level way, like what's the methodology that you came up with that like 500 plus thousand miles per accident?
Okay, so I would say the analogy would be, you know, when I first learned how to drive, my dad told me, don't worry because every car on the road drives better than you. So if you think about it, the very trashy robotaxi, the Baidu one in China, they already are running it, and it goes very well. It has very few accidents. Why? I would argue that because every car on the road is drives better than the robotaxi now, and human will save the robot's ass. You know, when robot car makes mistake, human will save their ass. So that's why for now, it seems like it might. So the first thing is, if you just let the car drive itself on the road, it will definitely perform much better than we expected for this reason. Because, you know, for an accident to happen, I assume that the event of a traffic accident is caused by one car getting involved into this critical event and another car also getting to these critical events, the same critical events at the same time. And these two, I assume these two events are independent. So basically that means the probability of a traffic accident is the probability of one driver may probably actively causing the critical situation and times the probability of another driver fail to escape from this critical situation. And if we assume the best scenario for humans, which means active and both passive causing these critical events, the probability is the same. So in this case, the number of critical events is the minimum. And by assuming this, we take a square root of the 67, actually 670,000 miles, the human accident data, take a square root of that, and we get around 800 miles. And I would argue that this is the estimated like miles to humans failure. It's no matter, regardless of who is at fault. So it's like every 800 miles, you might cross a red light, you might be very tired, you ignore something on the road, you have a close call to hit someone when you merge to the main road, something like that. Every 800 miles, a human will have some critical, like close call, and that is the kind of like the methodology. And because the key thing is, I think if you think about the critical disengagement, this is exactly the definition of the close call, as just said. So no matter who is at fault, because sometimes when another car is about to hit our car when FSD is driving, we need to intervene, and that still counts as a critical disengagement for FSD. So if we really want apple to apple comparison, that is my approach. Yeah.
No hands mode.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. I think your sort of main realization, it sounds like recently, was that you take that square root because in general, two drivers are involved. So that's why it's, on the order of like 800 miles as opposed to, hundreds of thousands of miles because it's the square root of the 600,000 plus. So I get that. I guess I'm just wondering for 12.5.1.3 in the chart, it's like close to 600,000. But if I look at like the FSD beta tracker, that version, it's like something like 150 miles to critical disengagement. And, even if you, square that, it's probably like 22,000 or something like that. So I'm just wondering, like, is there some other adjustment factor there that scales up, that number so that it gets to that, what is it, about probably 570,000, that last red dot on that chart? I'm just wondering, like, mathematically, from a high level, how do you get there?
Yep, actually, so because the issue that I mentioned earlier, that since we still don't have a large scale free trial yet, so there are only probably, let's say, 20 or 30 testers in v12.1.3, and those 20 testers definitely cannot represent for the whole population. So the way I did it is using the earlier relative multipliers that I got calculated, and I used 12.3.6 as a base point because that version has huge amount of data. So because that happens when the North America has around 1 million users got free trial and tried their FSD, and therefore and also for this long time, people are keep contributing to this version, and that version just has a huge amount of data. And based on that, I use that as a base point, and I then use the relative multiplier to calculate, to estimate the miles to critical disengagements in the latest version. Basically, that means I'm estimating if we have this free trial for 12.5, the latest version today, and we have those 1 million users try 12.5 and contribute to this community tracker, what would be the results? And then my estimated result will be around 700 miles to critical disengagement, regardless of city or highway, because there's no data for human city or highway. We only have like the total miles driven. So I really try to have this apple-to-apple comparison. So the miles to critical disengagement for the latest version of 12.5 is estimated to around 700. So that is my adjustment.
Got it. Thanks for that. And one other question is, I think one of your key assumptions is that the National Safety Council says it's like 71% of incidents involve two cars. So I assume the other 29% is maybe just one car. So I'm just wondering if you try to account for that other 29%, how much do you think that changes the math here?
That is actually one thing I thought about, but I actually don't know. So because if we think about all the critical disengagement we can have obstacles, we can have traffic controls, we can have pedestrians. There's lots of possibilities, and it is very hard to do a very precise estimation. But I would argue that I I really don't think I really don't think it will cause like very significant difference. So the conclusion that I want to make are two. So the first conclusion is we are seeing FSD is really improve really fast. And the second thing I want to say is that FSD is really on the same order of magnitude in safety as humans. So their difference is no larger than 10 times. And I'm not really want to say, I don't want to say that FSD is already better than human or like close to human or a little bit worse than human. I would say it's just they are less than 10 times differences. So it's in the same order of magnitude, unlike what others says, like, oh, they're 100 times difference and it takes 10 years, 20 years. That is false.
Okay, Rains, let me ask you a couple of questions. So you made a prediction that it's going to get to about 65 miles between disengagement. So if I look at this chart, you're saying relative miles to intervention over FSD versions, you're showing an exponential curve, and you're saying by the end of this year, it's going to get to 65 miles to intervention. Okay. First of all, are you an all-in investor in Tesla, or what percent of your portfolio is in Tesla stock?
I'm an all-in investor. So, but
You are? Okay.
Yep,
Did you say yes? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
And then, so when do you, like, what's your kind of general expectation for robotaxi timeline?
I would say I expect FSD to achieve like similar to human level driving like before the end of this year, and I expect Tesla to get global robotaxi approval before the end of next year. That is my current like very rough estimation.
So based on this data, you expect Tesla to get global FSD approval by the end of next year.
Actually, let me take it back. Maybe I would say more conservatively, probably for one, at least for one city, because I really think it makes a lot of sense to say that the any regulations, those regulators, they want probably, let's say, 10 billion kilometers of data to show that it actually drives better than human, and it makes sense. And I think I agree that when Elon first mentioned it, FSD is probably still in its like internal beta release. But after years, and when people ask Elon again, and Elon say, okay, that's probably still the same correct order of magnitude. So I will assume that Elon do not make like very clear numeric mistakes, and maybe there's maybe someone talked to Elon and they kind of have an agreement or something. But I would currently I think the 6 billion miles is the best estimated milestone that I can take, and my estimation for
We have a question for you, Marcel.
Hey, Yamin. This is my first time speaking. Is it cool if I push back on something like assumptions that Reigns has made?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to go back to the assumptions about how you got to the miles between accidents. So from my understanding, what you said was that you're basically taking two vehicles and the probability that they both have like a critical disengagement, which would cause an accident. And unfortunately, I don't think you can do it like that because most accidents don't happen by two people making a mistake at the same time. Like there's lots of cases that you can think of where, a car just runs into another one. The other car has nothing to do with it. They could be driving perfectly.
Or a tree.
Yeah. So I just I'm a huge Tesla bull. I'm all in. So I'm all for data as the numbers, but I got to push back on that assumption because to me it just doesn't make any sense, and anything downstream from that just won't be accurate.
Yeah, sure. I think your concern is totally valid, and I also think about that very, very deeply, and think about it for probably last 24 hours. Like I keep thinking about it. Is it okay to assume that? So I would say the assumption that I make that probably I don't have very good explanation is that I assume all the accidents are two-car accidents. So like Omar said, you could run into a tree, but that is clearly not a two-car accident. But I just based on a data that 71% of accidents are two-car accidents. So I kind of make a very simplification to assume that all accidents are two cars. Okay, that's the first part. And the second part is I totally agree that you could have, let's say, you could stop in waiting for a red light, and there's some other car just rear-ended you, and you're absolutely at no fault, and that is definitely only their responsibility. So they're at fault. But I would say that the way I think about it is not really think about who make mistakes. It's not about the probability of making mistakes. It's more about if we observe this event happening from a party view, third person view, and we are thinking about what is the probability of these guys getting involved, regardless of whether they are at fault or not. So sometimes it could be I just ran into you. Sometimes we both making some mistakes, and it is really hard to estimate the probability case by case. But if we just think about it, let's say for a human to have accidents, if someone really make their mistake and I'm at no fault, but I still have a chance to see it and prevent these accidents, but I failed to do so. And this is also considered as a possibility, like in human accident data, or in, I would say in another words, let's say if the probability of my failure is 0, then no other car can have accident with me. So I always have a probability of failure. So I fail to prevent the accident.
Okay,
Yeah.
Marcel.
Yeah, one other point I'd like to make. I think just generally it's oversimplifying things. But the other point too, and I have a background in industrial engineering, which does a lot of probability and statistics. And the other issue is that you have to factor in time. So your assumption is basically like that both things would happen at the same time, but the data you're probably looking at is like on average data. And so you can't really do it that way. Actually, like if you factor in time, it would be even less likely. So like the numbers you would have for miles to accidents would be way higher because it's like really, really difficult for both of those things to happen at the same time. So I just think the assumptions are oversimplified, and I'm all about numbers and data, but to me, I have to push back on this because to me, it's better to basically say like, well, we don't really know because we don't have the right data than to have assumptions that are wrong and then draw conclusions from that.
Okay. Marcel, let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you own a Tesla?
No, I don't own a Tesla because my money is in Tesla stock, which I think will go up more than.
Are you an all-in investor?
Yes.
Okay, and how long have you been tracking FSD data?
I honestly don't really track it that much. I'm on your space like all the time, but I'm more of a long-term investor. I think that FSD will be solved. I don't really care about the short-term, like the take rate for FSD. For me, it's all about robotaxi and like long-term Optimus stuff.
Okay. When do you think Tesla robotaxis will come about?
I'm like similar to Omar, where he says like late 2025, like early 2026. I feel like that makes the most sense. But again, it doesn't really matter to me because I'm more of a medium to long term investor, and I fully believe that it'll happen in that time.
Okay, so you believe it's going to happen end of 2025, early 2026, in line with Omar's expectations. Fair? And if it was, but it would change your investment thesis or maybe view on the Tesla stock if it didn't happen. If you knew for a fact that it wasn't going to happen until 2030s, is that correct?
Not really. I don't really need to pull from this money right now, so I would still invest. I mean, I strongly am confident that it will happen in that time, but if it doesn't, it's not that big a deal.
Okay. So is it fair to say that even though you see some problems with the assumptions that Reigns is making, you still are in the same ballpark with him about timeline to robotaxis?
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. What do you make of Tesla FSD tracker?
What's that?
What do you make of Tesla FSD tracker? Why do you think Reigns' conclusions are differing so much from Tesla FSD tracker?
I haven't really followed the FSD tracker. I mean, I've heard you guys talk about it a little bit, but to me, I just want to push back on the the assumptions, like just mathematically, logically. Yeah.
Okay. Omar, any thoughts?
Yeah, this guy is somebody we should have on the space more, especially as we talk about the stats. I mean, you know, looking at
Which
the
guy?
Marcel,
Okay.
looking at the Tesla FSD tracker to try and figure out how FSD is performing is like trying to figure out what someone had for lunch by listening to a recording of their fart over and over. You can probably kind of try and figure it out, but so many people are just treating this as fact because they have nothing else to go on. And we have to understand the nuance in the data. Just as we were in this space having this discussion, I was reading a note from Piper Sandler, and they had a web conference with Elias about the FSD tracker. And they're also looking at it and saying, "Oh, well, it's actually regressed a little bit." And I'm just rolling my eyes like, "Oh my god, like people are drawing way too many conclusions from this data source." Obviously, with the FSD tracker, you have people just, kind of answering a survey, a random set of people. And so ideally you want to have a random distribution of users. So rather than having the user self-select, because the guys who are going to, join that are weird, uh, or they're not going to necessarily be representative, right? So you want to like randomly pick people, maybe randomly pick people and pay them a little bit or something to report or something like that. So you truly get like an average person. And it's inherently subjective. Like I had a guy tell me today, "Hey, I had a critical disengagement. I was driving by a construction site and a construction worker walked up and the car braked. And it was braking too hard. I was worried the guy behind me was going to hit me." Right? So that functionality came from somebody saying, "Oh my god, a construction worker walked out and it didn't stop. And I had a critical disengagement." But then now the other guy's saying, "Oh, I'm worried about the guy behind me hitting me." Even though technically that's his job to not hit you. But there's an inherent subjectivity in critical disengagements, which Range touched on well. He said someone like Omar is, I'm making a video and I'm trying to show what the software is doing. I'm not going to take over unless it's absolutely necessary to prevent a crash. Whereas somebody else may take over for a number of reasons. You don't know whether a crash is actually going to happen or not. I mean, just yesterday, I was making this left turn and then there was like a car waiting. So the car went to make the left turn, but then a car that was stopped decided to go. And for a moment I thought it was going to hit me. I almost grabbed the wheel. But then the car stopped, my car stopped and the other car stopped. And FSD was able to handle it without me doing anything. So normally that would have been a critical disengagement. Or also I had like a left turn where it was going to make a left turn, and then there was another car coming straight at me, and I lifted my hand. I was about to take over, but then the car stopped itself before I was able to take over. So that could have been a critical disengagement where I say, "Oh, I think it looks like this car is about to hit me. I have to disengage." But in reality, the system was able to prevent it. But I wouldn't have known that if I had taken over. And usually the good thing is to be on the safe side. You want to take over more than necessary rather than taking over less is necessary, because less is necessary means an accident. So there's an inherent subjectivity in what is a disengagement, right? Some things are obviously not subjective, but there's going to be some variance there. And that's what Rains was trying to isolate. He's saying, okay, do they start it in the parking lot? A huge number of disengagements are really in the parking lot because of the challenges there and it's unmapped. So if
Yeah.
someone told me I have 20 miles per intervention in the parking lot, that's almost more impressive than 500 miles per intervention on the highway, because the concentration of challenges
Right.
is so much richer. So there's so much nuance to this data.
Okay, good. Thank you. And if you want to dig deeper into these topics, Omar and I had a one-on-one conversation on my YouTube channel. I'll pin at the top of your screens the conversation. Members get a 1 week early look at this conversation, and I see in the data that members have already watched this interview, which is amazing. I mean, the click-through rate is like 80% right now, which is incredible. You can sign up and become a member of the YouTube channel Sport TSLA Live for $2.99 a month. It really helps a lot. The link is at the top of your screens. Let's go to Just for Fun.
Yeah, thanks, Omar. I'm wondering for you, for 12.5.x, I'm not sure which version you're on, but I guess between any 12.5.x versions that you've tested, what do you think is your miles to critical disengagement? And then if you define it differently, what do you think is your miles to like probable accident, like where you think it would have gotten into an accident in your experience?
Well, it's really difficult to know because I haven't had any critical interventions on this latest version yet. Um, I had some that I almost took over, but there hasn't really been anything. It's like, turn around, help it reverse, stuff like that. I'm certain that if I drove enough miles, I would eventually find a critical intervention, but it's probably, north of 500 to 1,000. But I haven't driven enough to experience it yet, but I've driven, hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 miles. I drove 80 miles just yesterday. Um, so it's hard to know for sure. I mean, even if you just look at, for example, like the FSD tracker, and if you say, okay, there's, you know, um, 200 miles per critical intervention on city streets, and the average speed on city streets is 30 miles an hour, you're talking about hours and hours of driving without a critical intervention. If someone's got a 30-minute commute to work, they could commute back and forth all day and not have any critical interventions, even with a number that low.
Okay. I'm going to go to Edward in a second, and then Marcella, I have a couple of questions. Before that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. This episode is proudly sponsored by Joa, fueled by Joa, the ultimate destination for premium Tesla accessories. Do you need a rock solid phone mount? Check. Looking for lightning fast charging solutions? You've got it covered. Joa's got the gear to take your Tesla experience to the next level. And because you're part of the TSLA Live community, Joa is hooking you up. Use the code TSLA Live at checkout for a special discount. That's TSLA Live, all one word. Head over to joa-life.com/TSLA Live right now and deck out for your ride. Thanks, Joa, for powering the Tesla community. The link is at the top of your screens. And our second sponsor, which I'm very proud about, Pay More. Are your old electronics collecting dust or ready to upgrade? Visit Pay More and turn them into cash. Pay More buys, sells, trades, and recycles electronics because Pay More believes the best technology doesn't have to come at the cost of our planet or your wallet. Join the Pay More revolution and make a difference in our world. Visit one of the 100 Pay More stores near you or visit paymore.com. Thank you, Pay More. Edward.
Yeah, to add to the Joa thing, my son just got the car, and I was like, "Look, you got to go to Joa, and you got to get on the Tesla Live so you can get the discount because he wants to buy a bunch of accessories already. He's already freaked out about it. So, and I'm trying to get him over to your thing and get him on here, and maybe he can come talk sometime. But anyway, the thing I wanted to add was to Omar's thing and into the terrain's evaluation is I think that the only way to get a true apples to apples is if you get some sort of psychological profile on the drivers. And I know Yaman hates when I use kind of anecdotal situations, but when my son drives the FSD in my car, which he rarely does because I don't see him at all, that he'll take it over like 4 times, and I'm like, why are you taking it off? Why are you taking it off? And then my wife will do it once in a while, and I'll virtually never do it. But we're doing it on the same vehicle, and we're causing weird interventions and weird data sets. And I think unless you get a profile of the actual driver and how risk averse they are, you're never going to get accurate data personally.
All right. Marcel, so you said this is the first time you're speaking. I want to learn more about you. Omar just gave you a shout out, which, is big honor. I know Omar has been following FSD for 4 years, involved in Tesla for a decade. He doesn't usually give these shout outs. So I want to learn more about you a little bit. Marcel Albrecht. Is that correct pronunciation?
Yeah, Albrecht. Yeah, it's German.
Albrecht. That's great. So actually, before that, I need to give a shout out to Alfran Garcia for becoming a new member of the YouTube channel. The link is at the top of our screens. So Marcel, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved with Tesla and how you became a all-in Tesla investor?
Yeah, sure. So I started investing in Tesla, I think around 2018. So I remember watching like some YouTube videos about Elon and Tesla, and obviously had heard about him and stuff, but had only been investing in index funds before that and never in individual stocks. But then just looked more into the stuff that Tesla was doing, and like more and more over the years became more all in. And on my background too, so I mentioned I studied industrial engineering, so I went to Georgia Tech and studied that, and then worked in manufacturing at Mercedes for 3 years after college. So I did like process planning for the production line. So I've got some manufacturing experience in the automotive industry, but then taught myself coding and then worked in software for a while. And then now I'm working on my own startup.
Okay. And what is this startup about?
It's a mobile app. It's going to be called Gather. So it'll be an app to make social plans with friends.
Okay, great. And what about Tesla excites you the most today?
For me, it's all about like the AI and autonomy. So for both Robotaxi and then for Optimus, I definitely agree with you that Optimus is like, I think you say it has a much bigger potential than FSD, which I would say too in the long term. But I've been thinking about like autonomy with vehicles for a while and how amazing that would be and how much of an positive impact that would be in so many different ways, and that's really what gets me excited the most.
What part of FSD topic do you delve into the most? Is it, FSD? Is it robotaxis? Is it others technologies like Waymo or Mobileye? Is it the experience in the car? What excites you more?
I mean, I don't really track much about like other OEMs that are trying to do stuff or Waymo or whatever. To me, like, I mean, we've talked about this so much, like that their approach is just so much different and more scale. So it just excites me that you can basically have a car that has a certain percentage of utilization, which is like, I don't know, maybe 10% or something like that, for the average person. And you can increase that utilization to, I don't know, much higher. I would say 60, 70% if you factor in like cleaning and charging and all that, which is like so much of a increase in value. That's like insane, especially to do for physical products. Like software scales really well, but to do something like that in the physical world is really difficult. And kind of like integrating software with hardware together to do that is awesome. And the fact that Tesla's so far ahead of everyone else and everybody else is just basically quitting. I mean, it's extremely bullish to me. It makes no sense, like Omar has said, that the stock is where it's at right now. I think there's a lot of institutional investors that
Okay,
don't really
so I'm
forecast
gonna
well.
push back a little bit and say,
Okay.
so you said earlier that you don't mind if it takes. You have to stay on mute when you're not talking. So you said earlier that it doesn't matter if it takes however long it takes. You said you have a longer term view on Tesla stock, that you don't follow the community tracker or other data points as closely as we do on FSD disengagements interventions, because you have a long term perspective on these things. Now, the counter argument to that is, if Tesla takes too long, and now there are 4, 5, 6, 10 competitors then Tesla wouldn't be able to charge an economic profit. So that would impact Tesla's intrinsic value, as opposed to if they solved it with your timeline, end of 2025, early 2026. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say to me, like I don't see any like American manufacturers really catching up to Tesla in AI anytime soon. Maybe some Chinese car companies would, but I feel like they're going to have issues like selling vehicles in the U.S. The other thing that I would say is I feel like Tesla has such a advantage in manufacturing at this point that the combination between the software and the manufacturing would still set Tesla apart. And then I would just say like the scenario that you're painting of it not happening, I just see that probability being very low. I think the probability that happens in the next 3 years is extremely high.
Okay, so you believe the probability of Tesla starting robotaxi service in the next 3 years extremely high. Would you like to put a number on it before I move on to the next person?
Yeah, I would say like 80 to 90% maybe.
80 to 90%. Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And I agree with Omar, and I hope that you come back to the speaker board more often. Now, before I go to the next person, I have a challenge for my members in the YouTube live chat. The challenge for YouTube live chat members is you have probably watched my one-on-one interview with Omar. In that interview, we went topic to topic, making forecasts quite a bit. And it was a very detailed conversation. There's one forecast that Omar made that was off the charts. One forecast that Omar made that was off, like literally off my chart. Do you know what forecast it was? I didn't mention it, but if you were paying attention to the screen, you might have noticed. So please let me know in the comments in live chat if you first person gets my I don't know what it gets, but I'll figure something out. First person to figure it out, I'll figure something out for you. All right. Nordic said machines mounts 10. No, that's not the answer. But good guess. Let's go to James. James, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good. Have you been listening to the conversation? This has been a great day for TSLA Live. I really appreciate it. Between Rains and Omar and Marcel, this has been extremely, and just for fun, extremely informative conversation. James, what are your thoughts on Rains's graphics and your take on progress of FSD?
Well, I'm still on 12.3.6, so I haven't had the ability to test 12.5. I am planning to go back to where I test drove the new Model 3 refresh because right towards the end of my test drive, I realized it had 12.5.1 installed, but I had just pulled back into the lot to drop it off. He told me I could come back again, so I'm trying this week to go back and actually drive around testing out 12.5. I still use 12.3.6 pretty much daily, even when I'm taking my kid to school. It works great. It's not perfect, but I keep hearing 12.5 is even better, so I look forward to getting that in my car once they can, put it out to AI3 hardware cars.
Okay, Omar, do we have an update on that? When FSD is going to get to hardware 3 cars, AI 3 cars?
No update. We have seen them testing outside Chuck Cook's house. Elon said they're working on it, but we haven't gotten an update in a while on that. Hopefully it goes out soon.
Okay. Thank you. Joe Maj, how you doing? Joe Maj. 3, 2, 1. Okay. People in YouTube live chats, members, we have close to 100 members now. and no one has gotten the answer. Which of Omar's predictions was off the charts? Interesting. Omar, do you remember?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, Nordic is guessing one guess after another, but no, he doesn't have any of those. Anyway, all right, let's see. Let's move on to other topics. We have 40 minutes left. That was a great conversation. Thank you very much, Rains. I hope you come back more often. I appreciate your insightful thoughts and the detailed work that you've done. We may not agree on assumptions, but that's why we have the space. We discuss these things in detail in long form formats, and we all learn, great insights throughout the conversation. So I really appreciate that. Omar, we have an Apple event coming up. They just announced the date. Did you see that?
No. What's the date?
Great question. I was banking that you would know. Let's see. Hold on. September 10. Ready, set, capture is the tagline.
Sounds like an iPhone event.
Yeah, it is an iPhone event, and I'm guessing they have something to do. It has something to do with their camera. I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting.
They're out of ideas.
You think so? I don't know.
They have no
I don't
clue
know.
what to do. Their last few
Okay.
phones, they're like, what should we do? Okay, put a USB port on it. All right. And people are like, okay, how is this different than my iPhone 10? I'm just gonna keep using that. So, they're gonna say, hey, we put another camera on it or something. I don't know. They're really kind of running dry here.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess what you agree with Warren Buffett then, huh? Time to sell.
I mean, everybody can see it, and I'm still gonna buy it anyway. I'm sure it's gonna be marginally better in some ways. The screen will be a little better, the camera will be a little better. I'll give them my money. But, the days of them coming up with some huge idea that's gonna change the way you live, they don't even try anymore. They go,
Yeah.
we did this.
Well, honestly, I'm hoping for one innovation, which is the AirPods, not Pro number 3. I'm really banking on this I stake the future of this podcast on their AirPods innovation. So I want to see some innovation there. I see we have 2 hands here, and Nordic is just relentlessly guessing. And he says, is it the 99% of miles on software? No, that wasn't it. Even though that's a very aggressive prediction by Omar, it was literally off the charts, literally. Okay, so as I was adding his forecast to the chart, there was no place to add. Okay, so you may have to rewatch it, members. Come on, I expect better from my members. Freddie.
So this is going back to the iPhone thing, but the action button on the iPhone 15 has made my life so much better because I've mapped it to preconditioning my car. I never have to get into a hot car in Texas again.
Okay, thank you. James. James. James is having issues. Hustleton, did you watch the interview?
I did, and I don't want to just throw out random volleys of guesses until I rewatch it.
Just throw out random guesses. It's fine. What did you think of the interview?
I loved it. Watched it Sunday morning with some coffee, and I always like hearing Omar's takes, but I did find Omar very non-committal. I thought this would, I know he doesn't want to be on the record, ironclad, but I thought he'd be a little more adventurous with his predictions, and even though he doesn't have all the data points.
Yeah, he was non-committal at the beginning, but I wouldn't say non-committal. I don't think that's the word. I think he was cautious. He was very cautious.
That's fair.
He had disclaimers. He came armed with disclaimers, which is fine. That's fair.
I mean, I don't know how to predict the future, so if you're asking me, hey, when's, 1,000, when's 10,000 Optimus? I don't know. And, I'm not in my thesis on Tesla doesn't revolve around knowing when 1,000 or 1,000,000 Optimus are going to be produced, right? I'm almost certain it'll take longer than I hope it'll take, but y- that's not really what I'm trying to do is guess the exact date. I think generally they will reach those milestones eventually.
Yeah. So the reason why I created that spreadsheet is because I noticed so a lot of people are asking me to do a DCF. Okay. But the problem with the DCF right now is that people's timeline forecast for robotaxis, Optimus, and other material topics when it comes to Tesla is all over the place. I mean, the range of estimates is insanely wide. So I'm trying to do these one-on-one interviews, and I identified about 20 material milestones for Tesla stock intrinsic value valuation. And I'm taking people one by one, and I pinned at the top of our screens the Deeper Conversations playlist. So we started with Dirty Tesla. That was a really good conversation. And then second conversation was Omar, which is available to members right now. The Dirty Tesla conversation is available to everybody. And then next, I think I'm going to have Larry. And I'm going to try to narrow down these ranges of estimates and then build a DCF. And we're going to do that together with members. And so that's partly, I mean, I appreciate Omar, you coming up to do the interview. And I hope that you come back once a month or so. We can revisit these predictions with new information and update that chart. And I want that chart to be the TSLA Live kind of center of DCF, the center of the launching point for TSLA Live DCF. That's my kind of vision. All right. So that link is at the top. Next topic. A couple of news items from the automotive industry. Stellantis is shrinking down Ram 1500 production even further, idling an engine plant in Michigan. So Stellantis has, in some cases, more than a year days of supply in some products, more than 1 year of days of supply. That metric for Tesla is like 15 days. For Toyota is like 30 days. For the industry overall is like 3 months. Okay, so Stellantis is having lots of difficulty here. So that's one. Earlier, we talked about used Tesla resale values. So you can go back and listen to that if you just joined us. Also, GM cut more than 1,000 software jobs. GM cut more than 1,000 software jobs. Omar, what do you think this means for GM?
I think it means that, like most legacy automakers, they have no clue what they're doing in software. Asking an automaker that puts together cars for 100 years to make software is like asking your grandma, the baker, to become a pro skateboarder. It's a dramatically different skill set. And someone who's good at one is probably not good at the other. So it really, I mean, the fact that they even had 1,000 people in their software division, that was mistake number one. Mistake number one is hiring thousands of people. We always talk, of course, about the famous book, The Mythical Man Month. And the Mythical Man Month talks about how in a software team, because of the need to sort of contain an idea in your head and the communication overhead, it's much better to have a small team. 9 women can't have a baby in a month. Hiring thousands of people won't let your software get built faster. And so it kind of, reflects a fundamentally uh, wrong approach to software, I think. And they've just really struggled to build their own software. You see it not only in General Motors, but also in Volkswagen, in pretty much every legacy automaker. And like the EV efforts after Tesla and the Model 3 became successful, they all announced their plans to become software companies and hire all these people and do their own software. most of these efforts have completely failed to produce anything that they can put in a car.
All right. It is kind of interesting that they cut more than 1,000 jobs. Do you think they're coming from Cruise or other parts of GM? And then the other thing is, so I actually asked my followers, what do you think this means? And I got a variety of responses because my view is similar to yours, but people came up with some original answers. For example, do you think it means GM is getting ready to license FSD?
No. I just think they are trying to cut costs, and these people were probably useless. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I don't think it's about FSD licensing or anything like that. I mean, if anything, they'd probably need help integrating that.
All right. We talked about Apple events. We talked about used Tesla values. We talked about GM. And then the other material event that's coming up this week is the Fed. Powell, it has a speech at Jackson Hole, which has historically been very material for Fed policy. Do you have any thoughts about that, Omar? Do you expect some sort of a shift in tone, policy, and do you expect it to be important to Tesla stock price?
I mean, there seems to be a consensus among the FOMC that the time to start cutting is approaching, and the balance of risks is now more balanced, and they need to be really be concerned about, a deflationary spiral and a softening labor market potentially. Things are deteriorating faster than they expected. So I think the chance of a September cut is high. Um, Now, I don't know what they're going to say in Jackson Hole. My thoughts would be that it'd probably be, reaffirming, but the market kind of expects a September cut at this point. So anything that pushes back that expectation a little bit could also affect the market negatively. But broadly, Tesla was a huge interest rate loser, and I expect them to be a big interest rate winner. Not only do their products become more affordable as rates come down, and they have to offer less of these financing deals, that the financing deal, they can offer that same 0%, 0.99% financing, and it costs them less to do it if the Fed brings down rates, right? So that kind of goes straight to their margins. And not only does it improve the sales of their products and improve earnings, improve average selling prices by making it easier to finance, an extra option on the car, you also are going to see a flow of capital into equity markets from bonds and other assets. So I think that'll all be very positive for Tesla stock. I think that at the same time, FSD is really hitting a stride. I expect that to be positive for vehicle sales as well. So, we've really been through this really tough tightening period for years now, and we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So, everything we saw with the tightening plays out in reverse as the rates start coming down.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Omar or Rains or anyone else on the board? Please request to speak. I'm going through your timeline, Omar, to see if there's anything I want to ask you about. Man, you tweet a lot. Do you tweet like 100 times a day?
Yeah, I mean, probably 100 times just since we've been in the space.
That's amazing. All right, I think we covered all this. Is there anything else on your mind? Anything about Cybertruck?
Cybertruck's awesome. I mean, I I don't really know if there's anything new about it. It does seem like people are still ordering the Foundation series, so I'm really excited for them to start producing the non-Foundation series, but doesn't seem like that's going to happen until Q4, Q1 at the earliest.
Okay. All right. Let's call the early day then. I mean, we went an hour and 40 minutes. Great conversation. I don't want to dilute the earlier conversation about the FSD tracker and Rain's analysis and some of the challenges of the assumptions. I thought that was really, really good. So if you all have just joined, I recommend listening to the beginning 1 hour, the first half hour of the space. Again, this episode is sponsored by Joa Life as well as Pay More. And I appreciate our sponsors. Thank you very much, everybody. Tonight, by the way, we have an AI amateurs space at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Pacific time. Omar, will you be able to join us for that one?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Okay, so AI Amateurs Space is a new series. We are focused on basically trying to learn and how to increase our productivity using AI tools. That's the general theme. We talk about general AI topics instead of focusing more on Tesla. This is pretty much everything outside of Tesla. And I like that. I like that because it brings a different crowd. And so I'm also going to air the stream that as well on YouTube. So AI Amateur Space with Michelle. Hopefully Sierra will be able to make it, and Omar as well. And I'm going to spend the next few hours to prepare for that space. I highly encourage people to join us tonight to get a better understanding of artificial intelligence and robotics in general, as opposed to just focus specifically on Tesla. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And I will chat with you tonight in a few hours. Take care.